on we might be listened to. So hello to people who are just tuning in. We'll give a formal welcome in a moment. All right. Maybe I'll just jump in and figure that people are joining us. Hello, I'm Daniel Kellogg, president of Young Concert Artists, and today I'm going to be having a joint conversation with Saad Haddad, composer in residence for Young Concert Artists, and Steven Banks, a saxophonist who just joined our roster in November. Before I introduce each of them more fully, I just want to say that we're delighted you're joining us today. Young Concert Artists is an organization that seeks to find extraordinary young talent in classical music and help get their career started and offer exposure, career guidance, opportunities, management, all the things that we can do. So today we're talking to a composer and a performer who are teaming up on a project that is well underway. And before we jump into that, first I want to say that Saad Haddad, a composer in residence for us, joined our roster a little over a year ago. He is a Dean's Fellow, a doctoral candidate at Columbia University, and will be, I think, nearing the end of his degree in the next year. We'll ask him about that later. He's written a lot of orchestral music for some fine orchestras, including the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And then saxophonist Steven Banks is a professor at Ithaca College in Ithaca, New York. He's a regular guest with the Cleveland Orchestra as a saxophonist, and already sort of a superstar in the saxophone world, and the very first saxophonist on our roster. So welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So first, I just want to start by, could you each tell us where you are and a little bit about what your quarantine or your lockdown has been like?
Sure. Yeah. I am right outside of Ithaca, New York, in a town called Freeville. It's a beautiful, very scenic area out here. And my quarantine has been very, very busy, actually. Teaching at Ithaca College, we had to make the full transition online, which was really difficult. And so I share the experience with all the educators around the country and around the world, and trying to make meaningful experiences and everything for our students. And I've had a lot of chance to or opportunities to collaborate with other artists virtually, and also to work on this piece with Saad. So it's been a good time.
All right. And Saad, where are you and what have you been up to?
I'm up in Washington Heights in Manhattan. And actually, very much like Steven, we had the whole change. I was also teaching a class called Music Humanities at Columbia, and we had to also do that switch. And pretty much in the first couple of weeks, I was really energized to work on this piece with Steven. So about the first almost month of the quarantine, I was working real hard on it. And then after that, I decided to take a little break from it. So I mean, that was basically for me. It besides the big change with the teaching, it wasn't really that much of a difference for me because I usually stay at home anyway. As far as I mean, besides the teaching, I'm usually at home composing. So that's basically what I did especially the first few weeks of the quarantine.
And I imagine that New York City is very intense right now. Is that right?
It's tough to feel it though when you're inside all the time. Okay. Especially when you're up in this area. I live, for people that don't know, Washington Heights. I mean, very northern, almost to the Bronx part of Manhattan. So it's not as populated, I would say, as Midtown, downtown area. But that, given that, didn't go outside, so it's tough to see, tough to feel it,
Okay, so you guys are collaborating on a piece, and this is a commission as part of Saad's composer in residence place on our roster. And this will take place on March 10th in Merkin Concert Hall. It'll be live streamed. So we're actually quite a ways out from the premiere of this piece. First question I want to ask is how did this actually come about? How, Saad, did you get involved working with Steven?
Well, I was at the auditions where Steven was auditioning for a spot with Young Concert Artists. And basically, I was asked to find the person that I'd like to work with, especially after they get to the final round. I think there were 3 or 4 finalists. And then I was asked which of these players would you like to write for, I said the first. I mean, to me it was an obvious choice for me personally because I've never written for the saxophone, and I really love Steven's playing. He's very visceral on stage, and I think there was one piece in particular, the Mozart, which I mentioned to Steven, the Mozart oboe quartet that he played on the soprano saxophone. I just found it like extremely mesmerizing, and I've never heard a saxophone a tone quality that way. So for me, it was an easy choice. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I should mention that oboe piece, transcribed for saxophone, will be on the debut concert, and Air Quartet will be joining us for that, so we're delighted. So just to recap, you go and attend the auditions where there's all the finalists, and then of the people that win, the people that are going to join the roster, you get to sort of pick who you're really interested in. We do take the extra step to ask the individual and make sure they're up for a new piece. So, Steven, when did we ask you, and what was that like?
Oh man, I remember that really well. Actually, it was right after I think the finals or the announcement, I guess. And I came to the office, and I think Monica from YCA mentioned the fact that Saad was interested in writing a piece. Would you want to write a piece? And for me as a saxophonist, it's always a no-brainer. Yes, I would love more repertoire by great composers. It actually wasn't until after that I was able to do a real sort of deep dive into Saad's music and see just sort of the breadth and depth of his work. And it's been a pleasure sort of getting to know that a little bit more.
But that leads into a question I wanted to ask, which is to have you tell us about Saad's music. But I want to mention to people viewing that we're using a different format this week, and we're not able to stream video. I would love it if some people might put links to your guys' websites and maybe some video of your work, because I hope after the interview people will check it out. So, Steven, could you describe for the layperson, what does Saad's music, how does it sound? How would you describe it?
Wow, the first thing that comes to mind is otherworldly.
Okay.
Yeah, he uses all of the pitches that we could possibly imagine. So a lot of times we think about the notes of the chromatic scale, the Western chromatic scale, but Saad also uses the microtones in between those notes, and so that opens up an entire new world of sounds and abilities that he's able to express with all of those extra pitches. And I think that this tradition comes from his background, and that is something that I've sort of enjoyed getting to know, is thinking about, well, how is music from the Middle East what are the different ways that we come about that music? Because I'm so adept in Western music, Western classical, other types of Western music, but it's really a completely different world than I'm used to, and that's something that I think makes it especially fulfilling for the debut recitals, but for any performer,
Well, that's great. Saad, how would you describe your use of quarter tonal tuning, and maybe in your own words, what does that mean for people that don't understand?
Yeah, well, I have this little, let's see if I can actually bring it up. Yeah, you can see it. So I have this little a small, tiny keyboard on my desk that it's kind of like so I don't have to reach for my larger keyboard all the time. I'm pretty lazy when it comes to that. So basically what it is you have, so these are just your normal pitches, right? But then the quarter tones, the microtones, are the pitches that are in between these pitches here on the keyboard. So for me, what I can do with that is I can actually replicate the scales that Arabic musicians use when they play their traditional music. And I can't necessarily do that with the pitches that we have on our 12-tone system that we use in the West, in Europe, and in the United States especially. So for me, that's the best way for me to replicate that kind of feeling, is to use those tones in between the notes on the keyboard.
I want to jump in and just mention that for people viewing, Western sort of classical music and lots of Western music goes by a certain scale that is a way of parsing out sort of pitches. And there's many other musics around the world that use very different scales. And so what you're talking about is adapting different scales to essentially Western instruments. Although, Steven, how old is the saxophone?
Well, not super old. Around 1846 is when the patent was.
And is the saxophone well adaptable to different tuning systems or the kinds of things that Saad is talking about?
Yes, actually, we can get in between all the different pitches pretty well. I think it definitely does change the timbre or the quality of the sound. Sometimes some quarter tone or microtone fingerings feel really similar to my normal notes, and some are really, really different. And so that's something that we've actually been sort of exploiting, is that use of tone color that these different tuning abilities give us.
There's an enormous amount of tone color from the saxophone.
Yeah.
So, Saad, you've never written for saxophone before, is that correct? I think you already said that.
I've written a sax quartet, and I've written a saxophone. I wrote a piece for the Dogs of Desire. This is like the Albany Symphony's new music ensemble a couple of years ago, and they had a couple of saxophones in the ensemble. But I've never written a saxophone piece where the saxophone is the focal point.
Okay.
And I think for a composer, it's very different when you have a singular instrument as the focus. It becomes very different for a composer, I think, than dealing with an instrument in an ensemble format, because in this kind of format with Steven, we could really focus in on very specific nuances of his playing, and also to try to push his playing too. What are some things that Steven hasn't done that he wants to explore? And vice versa for me too. Steven can push me to go in different directions. So a long story short, I mean, it's my first time writing a piece for saxophone in this realm. So I'm basically relearning the instrument as we go along.
Well, I know you've both been very collaborative in this process. I think there's a lot of back and forth. So can you actually tell us how the whole process got started and what it's been like for each of you?
Sure, yeah. Well, our first sort of meeting was actually in person. Before all of this started, we met up
in the old days.
Right, yeah, many moons ago. We met up in New York, and that time we were just getting to know each other. And I think that that's something that's really important for me when I'm playing any sort of music, is if I can know the composer, that just makes it just everything so much more rewarding in the end. And then since then, Saad went and did a lot of brainstorming and thinking and all of that. And then we connected a few times after that. I remember one of our first conversations after that was centered around just wanting to deepen our connections in a way. So I remember we were talking about our families, our family history, and we figured out some things that about our past that sort of overlap, and things that we might want to highlight in the piece that make it unique to both of us. And then beyond that point, I think it's been a lot of me answering Saad's questions and receiving drafts and things from him that maybe he could talk a little bit about how it's been since then, because from there it's been more of me reacting, I think.
All right, Saad, how has this unfolded from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, what I usually do in the very beginning is I always listen to some of the things that Steven has played. And then the second thing I do after that is I just dive into repertoire of the saxophone. So I asked Steven, what are your favorite, some of your favorite pieces? And whether you think I like them or not, I don't care. I want to know what are the pieces that you recommend. And then after that, I kind of go, you go on YouTube, you look for the pieces. And then, on the right side, there are YouTube's algorithm tells you what other pieces to look at, and you go down the rabbit hole. So for me, I spend usually about a week doing that to see what's possible, and what are some of the things that I just viscerally gravitate to without even thinking about why. The why for me is later on. Why am I gravitated toward this kind of sound or this kind of form or this way of playing the saxophone? And then what I did after that is I have this big sheets of paper where I just write down a lot of words that have to do with the piece, emotions, gestures, mainly words. I do a lot of just jotting literally words, no notes, no pitches, nothing like that. Just random words on a big piece of paper, and then we get into the pitches after that.
Saad, I've heard you talk before about how you need to be very inspired by the performer, and that's even more important possibly than an extra musical idea or just you're excited to write, a piano concerto. You want to be excited about that performer. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I think that's not totally unique, but it certainly defines you in some ways as a composer.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, from right off the bat, the last piece I finished, I wrote a piece for Aristo Sham, a piano piece. That was the last piece that I officially finished, the piece that was supposed to be premiered in April. But the piece before that, I wrote a clarinet concerto for this clarinetist named Kian Azme. And, his sound was up. His sound is really, just like Steven's sound too, is very up front. It's a sound you don't forget, let's put it that way. So for me, I have to have the sound, I have to have the personality in the forefront when I'm writing. Otherwise, it's almost like I could be writing it for anyone. Of course, down the line, I'd like other people to play the piece, have a life, but in the first instance, it needs to have a life with the first performer. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it doesn't have a life at all, Mm-hmm. So, I'm not alone in this thinking. A lot of my friends think the same way. That the person you're writing for, basically, you have to block everything out. So sometimes with me, or sometimes a performer would tell me, "Oh, Saad, this," and this happens a lot with my music, especially. "Oh, I don't know, I can play this, but I don't know if anybody else could play it." I'm like, "Well, once they'll see you play it, maybe they'll want, maybe they'll push them to play the piece, or to, unless there's some physical thing, like the instrument might be different or something." But I found, generally speaking, that that relationship is really healthy, especially with the first performer.
Well, you both talked about the initial getting to know you phase and how there were some musical components of that and non-musical. I guess I'm sort of curious if each of you could share one thing that surprised you learned about the other, whether it be musical or non-musical.
Well, I'm trying to remember the exactness of this. So, Saad, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that we connected that both of the sort of on our mother's side, sort of the origins of those cultures come back to being British imperialist cultures. Is that correct? Or am I off with that?
Yeah, because I was talking about Lebanon and
right.
And
Haiti from my side. Yeah.
I don't know how directly that relates to Lebanon, but it's good to know things like that, like deep personal things. It's when you meet anybody else, those kind of questions are not usually the first things that come up. But when you're writing a piece for someone and you're literally spending all day for a month or two, you have to just get to the to that aspect of a person, at least for me, because I'm about to basically be in a relationship with this person. That's how I view it. Honestly, it's like I'm in a relationship with this person, so I need to know these things. Yeah.
So, what was something that surprised you that as you got to know Steven, whether musical or non-musical?
I think just how I found out that he was was a professor, so I knew that he would be really busy and all that. But I was surprised at how laid back he was, actually, to be honest with you, like how laid back he was, his personality, and just very easy to get along. I mean, you never know, because the way that we met wasn't like, we met in school, or we just friend of a friend. It was literally, I saw him on stage,
Yeah.
and I picked him out from a bunch of people I didn't know. So that in and of itself was a very strange way for me to find someone to play my music. So that aspect, that surprised me. You expect this, really driven. He is driven, but you expect someone that's, not as laid back, but he is, and he's, it's very easy to talk to, and very easy to have this back and forth without feeling like you're stepping on anyone's toes.
Well, the way that you sort of got put together is almost a little bit like one-sided speed dating. I mean, you just have to hope for the best. So you've already both articulated this is a serious commitment and a collaboration, and there's a lot of risk involved. I mean, one of you is pouring yourself out into the notes, giving it to the other, and the other has to sort of receive it. And then at the end of the day, Steven's on stage and Saad is not. So what happens if you disagree, or what happens if you find that your artistic ideas diverge?
Well, I think that Saad and I were talking about this, and I think he put it beautifully when he said that usually we don't really think of it as a disagreement. It's something that we see as two different perspectives that end up creating something better. And so I think that in the creative process, there have been a lot of times where we might go about something in a different way than each other. But at the end of the day, us having to explain that, articulate that to the other person in a way sort of informs how it will end up at the end. So it's been, I think it's something that actually makes the piece just a lot better whenever there's something that I have to say, well, what is this for? What is this about? And then I really, really understand it after he explains. So.
So how about for you when you guys are trying to understand each other and work through differences?
I mean, I find that actually when Steven pokes at something that I wrote, oftentimes actually I start to think about it, did I really mean to do that? Or, does it really need to be that technically challenging for that little passage? And then it makes me revise my thoughts even more. And oftentimes I come up with something a little better, and it also sounds better when he plays it. So I think that it's healthy. That's why I like this, like I said before, we didn't know each other before and I know these things will come up. So how we deal with it is how I'm enjoying it. If Steven just told me, this sounds great. This is great. This is great. This is great. In the back of my mind, I'll be like, what's up with this guy? He doesn't. So, but he does, which is great because it makes me work that much harder. When someone tells you, that they don't like this, or they think this could be better, or this could be better executed technically, or what have you, it makes the other person on the other side try even harder, and it gives inspiration actually. So that I wouldn't call it friction, but whatever kind of friction that is, it's very helpful for people that create. I think you need to have that.
Yeah, well, you're both highly accomplished and highly trained musicians that obviously bring artistry, humanity, technical proficiency to the process, and hopefully if there's a healthy respect, it will just yield fantastic results. What can you tell us about the piece at this point? I mean, where are things at with the piece?
I'll let Saad take that one.
That one for me. Well, I was working on it really hard the first few weeks, probably almost a month. And then, I could say that the first movement of the piece is almost done. And the way I decided to go about that is I wanted to figure out a way to explore the entire range of the saxophone. in a very lyrical way, but not to be super lyrical in the beginning, if that makes sense. So a lot of arpeggios with quarter tones mixed in, where you can't really perceive that there are quote unquote wrong notes, but then as the movement goes on, the notes start to get closer and closer together and faster, and you start to perceive that there is some other kind of like as Steven says, otherworldly scale coming in the texture. So that was my idea for the first movement of the piece. And then I started a little bit of the second movement, and then I just kind of tailed off after that. But as far as like the idea of the piece, a lot of it is very musical, actually. Not a lot of extra musical influence besides the fact that it's based out of Arabic scales, and which all my music is, basically. I wanted to go for as much of a musical offering, so to speak, as possible.
Okay. Sorry, you've mentioned two movements. Is it a two-movement work?
It's probably going to be a two-movement work, yeah. We were talking about a third movement, but it kind of fluctuates. It depends on what happens with the second movement, but I like to leave it open.
I love that you don't know. I mean, there's a real active discovery here. The piece.
I mean, we don't know anything right now as far as the world goes, so why do I have to know what my piece is?
Saad, how would you describe the piece so far?
Oh, well,
Steven, how would you describe it so far? Forgive me.
Yeah. Well, in the first movement, it's interesting for me to think about it now, sort of in hindsight, about how it's developed. The first sketches that he sent me were around this sort of pendulum-like idea. And so I think maybe you can tell one of the frictions sometimes or differences is that I'm always sort of connecting music to the extra musical. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I'm trying to get Saad to say, well, but what is it, what is it like? What is this or whatever? So I might think of it in those terms sometimes. And so there's this sort of pendulum idea that's going back and forth with all of these arpeggios and things like that. And one of the things that one of the first suggestions that I made with the piece is that we have an opening that really sets the stage in a way for people to receive this pendulum idea, so that it sort of develops into a pendulum and doesn't necessarily just start out in that way. So there's now a solo soprano saxophone opening where I'm just establishing the tonality, if you want to call it that, the tonality of the movement. And then it really sort of organically develops into this pendulum idea. And then it's really cool how he's integrated the piano, because I think he described it to me as the piano sort of is chasing the saxophone at a certain point. So there's a lot of sort of blurring of these very clear lines that sort of start out. And then, like you said, it sort of grows and grows until the notes are coming in closer, and you sort of feel this nucleus evolve or come out in the music. And so I think it's a really evocative work so far, and that's what I'm really, really excited about. Like, regardless of what type of pitch content is happening or anything like that, it's something that when I listen to it, I'm excited, and I feel that, which is, what we're all searching for, I think.
Well, it's great. Obviously I'm very biased. I think it's a special thing to bring a new piece of music to life, and the collaboration, the give and take, the evolution. We think that Beethoven and Bach, the music just fell out fixed, but actually it almost certainly didn't. There was almost certainly a give and a take and an evolution, and that's what you guys are living out. I know you had given me some images, and I wonder if you want to share any of those. Should I bring them up?
Yeah, I mean, what Steven was describing actually has to do with the second number 2 image that I sent you.
Look, here it is.
The idea of the pendulum. So, yeah, so like if you look here, there's this pendulum going on between number 1 and number 3. So you'll see, for those of you that read music, I have this line here that says transposed, and then there's like this eighth note equals 110 to 132, and then below that you see a bunch of music, and then I have this 1 and 3 numbers, and number 1 is the first first part of the one. It's one swing of the pendulum, and then number 3 is the next swing of the pendulum, and then we go back to the first one, and then the third, and the numbers just denote the dyad, this multiphonic. It's basically a sound the saxophone makes where you can hear 2 notes at the same time. So the pendulum swing is between 2 of those dyads, those multiphonics, where you hear those like 2 notes that are being played at once. So that's the pendulum that Steven is describing right there. That was actually the first iteration of this idea that he's mentioning in this picture.
Right, and that's funny because from there, this kept going for a while, and I remember I said, Saad, I need to breathe at some point, because it was sort of going back and forth. And then one other interesting thing, since we have this pulled up too, is with those multiphonics that Saad was talking about. That was another part of the early collaborative process for us. I actually sent him a bunch of multiphonics that I thought were really, really great on the saxophone. And so actually charting out the fingerings that you can see on the top of this page. So those dots and lines and then B flat and E flat, all of that kind of stuff are ones that I specifically told Saad would work really well.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a better image of them.
Yeah.
And it's been really cool to see how he's made these sounds that come out of the saxophone. Oftentimes they're not as accurate as double stops on like a violin or cello, but he's managed to make them have some sort of tonal implication in the way that he's done the piano part, which is really interesting.
I want to make sure, you may have already said it, but just to pause and remind people, multiphonics is a fancy way of getting more than one pitch out of the instrument. It looks clean in this example, as Steven was just saying, but actually it's a bit messier and there's a very special color. And different instruments, different players will get a very different nuance out of a multiphonic. It's a pretty cool thing, and you actually will hear it in more than just classical music, in many different kinds of music. I know we have pictures of your guys' studios. Can I bring those up?
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's start with Saad. So I love this. This is like the efficient, almost IKEA version of a studio. What do we got here?
It is an IKEA version of the studio.
Sorry, I hope that was not a negative comment.
Yeah, it was just interesting because Katie Balch, the other one of the other composers on the roster, she had a video up a few weeks ago, and I was saying, it's funny because her studio is like the exact opposite of mine, because she's got so many things in her workspace, and mine is the exact opposite. You don't have literally as few things as possible that I could have, and I mean that's just the way that I am. I hate clutter, and I hate having too many things on my desk because I get easily distracted. So I just have my keyboard overlooking the window. Over there, a lot of nice shrubbery and stuff. You have that little keyboard on the desk, which I just showed earlier, for those that saw that. It's just easier for me to be there in case I have to look at the screen all the time instead of going to the big keyboard all the time. Then I have 2 big speakers over there, and then the large screen, and that's it. I mean, it's very simple. And then I have a lot of space to put. So that sheet of paper there is one of the big manuscript papers I was talking about earlier. So there on my table, I just have a lot of space to write notes and things like that. So yeah, it's very ergonomic, I should say.
And I noticed the pencil sharpener, which means 2 things to me. One is you're traditional and you write things down pencil and paper first, and the second is that you don't go with mechanical pencils. So You learn something new every day.
And I drink a lot of water.
Okay. All right.
That.
All right.
And then I said, you know what? It's important to show it.
All right, Steven, you have a little glimpse of your studio here. What do we got going on?
Sure. So I actually have a couple of different areas in the house where I work, and this is more of the area where I like to practice and to record things, because I record a lot when I'm practicing. And so I highlighted the lights there just because I'm excited, because, you know, during quarantine, I've been trying to figure out how to do better videos and collaborative projects with other folks on the roster and everything like that. And in the back, you see the ladder, which is where I put my camera. And this
tripod, is it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And up front is a new addition to my microphones, which is a ribbon microphone that I just feel captures the saxophone, you know, way better than a phone or other types of mics as well. So yeah, I like to practice in here and do my recordings.
Well, certainly you've touched on something that every musician right now is asking: how can they get better tools at home? You know, how can you get a better sound, a better video, better lighting? And then even thinking back to, you know, Saad's studio, obviously the tools of a composer have greatly changed over the centuries. And we still have the pencil and paper, but we now have all this other stuff as well. I think it's really cool to get a glimpse of your studios, because seeing how somebody works, thinking about process, to me tells me a lot about who they are and what they do. And then I love to think about that when it's actually on the stage. So I really want to remind people that check out our live stream on March 10th, when you will hear this piece. And probably we'll actually do a conversation maybe following the concert, or maybe we'll do it around the time of the concert, and we might circle back to some of the same questions. Mm-hmm. I want to invite people to send in some questions. I'm going to stop the screen sharing. So if you have some questions, did we lose Saad?
I think we lost Saad.
Come back. Hopefully he'll come back in a minute. But if people have questions, there is Saad, so I need to add him back in. That's okay. We are all back. But I just want to invite people to send in questions. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, Steven, we were talking earlier about how the early deadline for the Young Concert Artist auditions is next Monday, June 1st. That means you can get the discounted rate. I think it's $55 for the early bird audition. And we have auditions every year where we work very hard to select some outstanding young people to join our roster. And so, Steven, sorry, I keep getting the names mixed up. Forgive me. That's
two S's.
Terrible idiosyncrasy. Steven, you went through our auditions last fall. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Oh, wow. So the experience itself for me, just in particular, was really, really, really intense, because I was simultaneously teaching full time when that was happening. So I think it was probably the hardest I've ever practiced in my entire life, because it had to happen outside of this full time thing that was happening. So really early mornings, really late nights. But all completely worth it. I came to know about Young Concert Artists, you know, many years ago, probably 5 to 10 years ago, and I always admired all of the alumni and people that were on the roster, and so it's something that has always been a goal for me, to be a part of an organization like this, you know. And the way that I describe it to people is that auditioning and gaining a spot on this roster is a chance. You know, it doesn't take you exactly where you're trying to go, but it gives you, every musician that comes through, the opportunity to perform, the opportunity to get all this mentoring, and to really have the space to refine your craft and to grow. And so I think it's been simultaneously one of the toughest experiences, but almost by far one of my most musical experiences so far. And getting a chance to connect with all of the musicians at the audition was amazing. And after that, connecting with all of the people on the roster and the staff has been just completely life-changing for me.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. You gave the plug that I would have given for Young Concert Artists. If people want to learn about the auditions or anything about our organization, you can go to yca.org. Thank you, Steven. Saad, there's a question that came in for you that I'll ask now from Ambra Casanado. And the question is, can you tell us how you will adapt your compositional technique to fit the needs of the saxophone? And I think you've touched on this some already, but you might expand on it further.
Yeah, I mean, with the saxophone itself, I want to make sure that I'm able to not just do as much as I can with the saxophone as possible, and just, you know, have this a tour de force of every extended technique possible on the saxophone.
Thank you.
Unless there was some specific reason for it, I like to choose certain things. So my compositional technique centers a lot around identifying a sound, especially in the Arabic tradition, that I want to go for, and figuring out how do I make that sound on a Western instrument. And then beyond that, I am really obsessed with form. I mean, something I haven't really talked about yet. And how do you get an audience member from point A to point B to point C, and how do you work with the idea of memory? And I think Steven actually himself as a performer helps a lot with that. He kind of does that on his own. I could see that in the way he performs the music. He really is able to help the audience connect different parts of the piece that he's playing. So I think in that way, he will help a lot in that, in conveying the form of the piece, which is a huge part of my compositional technique.
Yeah,
you know, Saad, that also made me think about when you said like trying to find aspects of the Arabic music tradition and like notate them, you know, for Western instruments. Yeah. That makes me think of, there was one video that I sent you where I was just completely messing around on the saxophone, trying to create some different sounds, and we never actually figured out how to notate that.
Yeah, there was this like one sound in particular that you made, which was really it was like this really open thing that sounded like a gliss that was spanning a huge interval or something. I don't really remember how you did it, but it was something with your mouth that you were doing. I don't even remember if
yeah,
it was a while ago, but yeah, it was, yeah.
It just made me think we got to figure that out, because that was really
cool.
Yeah. Well, there's a question that came in related to what you're just talking about, which is, this is from the Violin Channel, does the saxophone resemble any Middle Eastern instruments?
Maybe the duduk.
The mizmar. Yeah, the duduk or the mizmar. It's a double reed. It's a double reeded instrument. It does resemble that kind of sound, and there are a lot of woodwind sort of instruments. Also, the ney, which sounds more like a flute. But there are some of these techniques, especially with the embouchure, that you can borrow from these instruments, and the nasal kind of tone quality that comes from an instrument like the mizmar or the duduk, that are very like inspirational to draw from. It doesn't mean that it would literally mimic the sound, but it's good to have like in the background or as inspiration to see, okay, what are some things that could maybe turn into that sound or come out of that sound, or what's what's the journey to that sound like, you know? And when you come up with those kind of thought exercises, that actually makes the compositional process more interesting than just saying, I want to make that exact sound on the saxophone.
Well, certainly there's an incredible thing about our modern era where we can take influence from all over the globe and hear things and then try to meld it in different ways. We'll wrap up soon, and hopefully at some point I'll have each of you on individually so we can really dig into your own music making, your own projects. But I want to hear about a project coming up for each of you that you're excited about and you want to share. So, Steven, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Well, Oh man, what to choose? I think that in the theme of working with composers, I'm actually going to have two premieres on my debut recitals, and so I'm really, really excited to also be working with Carlos Simon, who is a fantastic composer in his own right, and we have had a completely different collaborative experience, which has been really fun for me. So I'm really looking forward to bringing that piece to life as well.
It's great that you are so committed to premiering new pieces. It's certainly a necessary part of an instrument that doesn't have the history of the piano or other things.
Right.
Saad, what's an upcoming project that you're very excited about?
I mean, I have a couple upcoming projects, but I can't really talk really about them yet. But as it goes, it's top secret. But I mean, this project definitely for me is in the forefront. I mean, I know it's strange to say because it's so long in the future, but that's the way that I like to work. But as far as compositions go, there are a couple others, but I can't talk about them right now.
I just saw a comment that was about you, Saad, saying, "Society for New Music. So proud to see how wonderfully Saad's career is developing. He was the Society for New Music's 2018 Israel winner, and our audience loved his music." So that's nice.
Thank you to them. Yeah, they performed my violin and piano piece, Command Fantasy. Unfortunately, I wasn't there to see it, but really happy to have been a part of that.
So where can people find out more about each of you? Where can they hear your videos, your music making, follow you online? Steven.
Sure. Well, they can go to my website, steven-banks.com. I have a YouTube channel, and they can follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And through my website, they can contact me anytime. I love to hear from people and to talk about the saxophone.
And Saad?
Yeah, also on my website, saadnhaddad.com. That's where all my music is pretty much lives. Or on YouTube, if you just YouTube my name, Saad Haddad, you'll see all of that stuff too.
And I just want to remind folks that this project came about because of the Composer in Residence program at Young Concert Artists. So Saad is our composer in residence. He's written a piece for Aristo Sham, pianist, which should have been premiered in April, and because of the pandemic has been postponed until this December. We're very excited to offer that premiere. And then he's now writing his second piece for Steven. But it's been a long program, I think running about 20 years, that YCA has had a composer in residence, and trying to make sure that these extraordinary performers are very active, premiering new pieces and working with young composers. And it's a program that I've personally actually been a part of. So we're so delighted that this collaboration has already sort of yielded such fruit that even though we're months out of the premiere, you're both actively engaged in this process. And want to remind people to check it out on March 10th. So thank you both for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Dan.
And I do hope that people right after the interview will go and listen to their music. It's we have to solve the problem of how can we have a great back and forth interview and also present some clips. And we're all, as you saw with Steven's picture of the home studio, we've all become broadcasters in certain ways and trying to embrace technology in this moment. So thank you both very much, Steven Banks, saxophonist, and composer Saad Haddad, and just wish you guys a great day and a great summer coming up.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.